In the mid to late 90s, survival horror was everywhere. Practically anywhere you looked, you saw another developer trying to dethrone Resident Evil with their own take on the genre. From Silent Hill to Alone in the Dark, the PS1 era was an amazing time to be a survival horror fan. In 1998, Squaresoft decided they wanted a slice of the survival horror pie, and so released the much-loved Parasite Eve on the original PlayStation. Parasite Eve was not like your traditional survival horror games. In fact, you could argue that very little of it is like a survival horror game at all. Combat is turn-based, instead of real-time like Resident Evil. Resource management is practically non-existent, with bullets and health being doled out around every corner. And overall, the game isn't really that scary. That doesn't stop Parasite Eve from being an amazing game, but if you are expecting an old school survival horror experience with this title, you're going to be disappointed. I'd recommend checking out the sequel instead if that's what you're looking for. Parasite Eve follows the story of a young NYPD officer named Aya Brea. The game begins on Christmas Eve in New York City, where we see Aya arriving at the opera with her date for the night. Everything seems to be going well until the opera begins, and well, this happens. I love this opening. Parasite Eve does not shy away from shocking moments, and even in 2019, scenes like this can be very disturbing, seeing all these innocent people being burnt alive on Christmas Eve of all nights. Aya Brea is the only one to survive this attack, and her date for some reason. Aya confronts the mysterious woman, who you soon find out is called Eve. The two of them fight, and afterwards Eve flees down a hole further into the theatre. Aya goes in after her, and this is where the game truly begins. One of the first things you'll notice while playing Parasite Eve is that it drops the traditional tank controls found in other survival horror games like Resident Evil and Silent Hill, in favour of a more traditional 2D control scheme found in other Squaresoft games like Final Fantasy. I'm personally happy they decided to go this route, because the battle system simply wouldn't have worked with traditional tank controls. You need to be able to dodge attacks and change position constantly in this game, and tank controls would have made that process a lot more difficult. So while exploring the theatre, Aya finds more people burnt alive by Eve. She also finds a diary from a woman named Melissa Pierce. It turns out Melissa is the woman you were actually fighting on stage. From reading her diary, you find out that she wasn't feeling too well and was on a lot of drugs leading up to the show. You don't yet know why Melissa has turned into this creature, although people who have read the novel this game is based on will probably have a fairly good idea about what's really going on. Aya also bumps into some terrifying creatures in the theatre. The cutscenes in Parasite Eve are worth the price of admission alone, even if many of them are gruesome and very difficult to watch, even today. Aya needs to battle these creatures in order to reach Eve, so now is probably a good time to discuss the battle system in this game. Like I mentioned previously, combat is turn-based in Parasite Eve. When Aya's ATB gauge fills, she is able to perform different commands. These commands range from a standard attack with her currently equipped firearm, using items, or even performing magical attacks later on in the game. Once Aya performs a command, she will have to wait for her ATB gauge to fill again before she can perform another command. However, unlike in a game like Final Fantasy, Aya can still move about the battlefield while waiting for her gauge to fill again, and this is useful for dodging enemy attacks or just to put distance between her and an enemy. It's a really good combat system and is a lot more exciting than many traditional turn-based combat systems. Once you win a battle, you will receive experience points and any items or bullets the enemies may have been holding. Gaining experience will level up Aya's stats, and you can also use some of those experience points to level up Aya's inventory space and weapons. Leveling up your gear in Parasite Eve is one of the most fun aspects of the game. It's possible to combine different gun and armor types to create something truly unique. Anyways, Aya eventually confronts Eve in the sewers, but she escapes before Aya has time to ask her any questions. And that's about all the story I'm going to cover here. Trust me, Parasite Eve's story is one of its strongest traits. It can be a bit confusing to follow at times, and the game has several exposition dumps, where complex concepts like mitochondria evolving are explored. It has several twists and turns that I promise you won't see coming. The game's characters also truly shine. Aya Brea was an iconic female protagonist back in 1998, and with good reason. She's strong, funny, and don't need no motherfucking man. Many female characters back in the 90s were often heavily sexualized, but Aya's design was impressively restrained for the time. Other characters, like Aya's partner Daniel, are also impressively fleshed out and add a lot to the overall narrative. The writing feels natural, and overall for a horror game released in 1998, Parasite Eve's story is impressively fleshed out. I also have to quickly mention the amazing recreation of New York City featured in this game. Before Parasite Eve, very few games were set in real-life locations. Most games used fantasy settings because technical limitations at the time meant most consoles simply weren't up to recreating locations found in the real world. But the artists and designers working on Parasite Eve absolutely nailed the look and feel of New York City, and it's an absolute joy getting to explore locations like Central Park, Carnegie Hall, and downtown in exquisite detail. You also can't talk about Parasite Eve without mentioning its legendary composer, Yoko Shinomura. Just like Aya Brea, she's strong, independent, and don't need no motherfucker. The music in Parasite Eve is incredible. Just listen to the battle theme, for instance. Oh, chills. I got chills. The soundtrack is full of memorable music like this, that is up there with some of Yoko's best work. Monster design is absolutely top tier. In a survival horror game, it's vital to have creepy and disturbing looking monsters, and Parasite Eve absolutely nails it. Boss designs especially will stay with you long after you've completed the game. Despite not being a very scary game overall, Parasite Eve's creatures are absolutely terrifying, and that's still a massive accomplishment. It's crazy how well Parasite Eve holds up over 20 years later. By not following the design and structure of many other survival horror games around at the time, Parasite Eve has arguably aged better than a lot of them. The controls are tight, the combat is engaging, it has an interesting story and well developed characters, and it's easily up there for me as one of the best games of the entire PS1 N64 era.